class. I do that. Well, now I get them automatically if I teach them, but when I go to a class, I often request a recording, or if you get interrupted by a phone call or a knock at the door, you don't have to miss that part of the class. So if you're joining by live stream today, I'd like to welcome you, but know that if you want to be interactive with us, the best way to do that is by going to the Get Set Up website and actually joining a class that way. We're not, neither Get Set Up nor I am paid to promote a specific product. So you know that in the craft world, we've all got our favorite products, right? And I'm going to mention those, and I'm going to mention the stores that I shop at, but we're not endorsed by any company at all. If you have questions, feel free to unmute yourself, or you can ask through the chat box. We do have a lot of participants today for a hands-on learning experience. So I've got my teacher's assistant, Joe, with us today. Say hi, Joe.
Hi, Joe.
Hi. And Joe will be monitor that chat box to make sure that I'm not missing anything as we go along today.
Sarah, I have a quick question. I may have to leave in a half hour. Yes. So did you say you're going to teach the same exact class next week?
Yes. Yeah, it's on the schedule already. I can't tell you the day and time right now, but if you go to the Get Set website and put my name in the search bar, you'll be able to find it.
By the way, months ago, I was one of the first to write in. How about a crochet class?
You're probably the one I saw on the list. They sent me the list and I went through it and I saw crocheting on there. So yours is probably the one I saw. So that's great. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right. Whoops. So you're gonna learn today how to choose the right supplies, how to do a slip knot and a chain stitch, how to single crochet, and a few tips and tricks. If you're beyond this, if you already know these things, this is, again, a very basic class. If you're beyond these, that's okay, you're welcome. You're welcome to participate. Maybe you'll pick up some new things, but I do want you to understand that it is basic. So I'd like to do a little bit of a check-in to see where people are. Joe, if you could help me with this by kind of gauging the chat box responses. If you're with me in person, if you're face-to-face with me, I'd love to see your hands on this and your actual fingers. Or if you don't want to have your video on, if you would respond in the chat box. I'm curious, and I'm going to check back in a few minutes and see where everybody is. So I'd like to know if you already know how to crochet and crochet well, show me 5 fingers. If you have some experience, but you'd like to know a little bit more, show me 3. And if you have no experience and you're here to learn for the first time, show me a 1. So let me see your fingers. All right, I see some brand new beginners. I see some people with some experience. And then Joe, you're going to monitor the chat box for me. All right, that's so helpful to know. Thank you for that. I'm already here. Let me get back to my, nope. Joe, I just lost myself. Can you help me, Joe, can you help me get back to my, I bet I can do it like this. There we go, I'm back. All right, so that's helpful to me to know where everyone's at. We've got a little bit of everything, so that's great. These are the basic supplies, and I'm going to go into these in a little bit more detail in a minute. You need a pattern. Or you need to be able to have a good eye for this. Now, I will tell you that I've almost always crocheted everything with a pattern. I do have a friend who's she's a knitter, and she can knit a complete top for herself without ever looking at a pattern. That's not my skill set, but there are people that do that. So being able to read a pattern is important, and it's a little bit like reading code. We're going to talk about that at the end. You need some yarn, you need a hook, you need some scissors, And two optional things are a yarn and or a darning needle. So it's a looks like a sewing needle with a hole big enough to get the yarn through, and stitch markers. Now the project we're making today does not require stitch markers, so you are not going to need that today. Some people will use that yarn and darning needle to weave in their ends. You can also use your crochet hook, so you don't need that extra supply unless that's your preferred way of weaving in your yarn. This to me is very important, and I used to not understand this because it used to be when you walked into a yarn section that there were like 2 or 3 kinds of yarn to choose from. Now when you walk into a yarn section, there's literally aisles of yarn, like in a Joann's or a Michael's or a Hobby Lobby. There are aisles and aisles. So being able to understand your label is an important part of matching your yarn to your project. So let's talk about this a little bit. This label is going to tell us, and this, by the way, is called a skein of yarn. Some people will simply call it a ball of yarn, but the proper name is a skein. And right here, this is the first thing that I look for when I look at a skein, and that is, what is the weight of the yarn? And this is telling us that this is a number 4 weight or a medium weight yarn. And they're gauged, you can see here, they're gauged by a number of 1 to 7. So it goes from really, really little tiny yarns, almost a thread, all the way up to things that are as big around. You've probably seen some of those great big huge yarn projects that are popular right now, where the yarn is almost this big around. So looking at this weight is important. Then it also tells you the weight of this skein, and that's right here. And this is telling us that this particular skein is 7 ounces, or metrically 200 grams. So it's telling you, and in a pattern, sometimes it'll tell you, like for example, this sweater takes 9 ounces. So you would know that this 7-ounce skein isn't enough, that you would need to buy 2 skeins to complete your project. And it's always recommended that you purchase enough yarn for your whole project when you purchase it. Yarn has what they call, many yarns have what they call a dye lot, and they'll dye it in a batch, number that lot, put it out on the shelves, and then you go back, let's say you go back 6 months or a year later and you're trying to match it. It's now a new batch with a new lot number on it, and it's not exactly the same. So anytime you can buy enough yarn for your whole project, it's important to do that. Or when you buy your yarn, it'll say on the front of the label, no dye lot, and when I say dye, it's DYE, because they dye the yarn. No dye lot means it doesn't matter if you buy it 10 years from now, it's going to be the same color. So you've got your 7 ounces, and then it's going to tell you the length. And this one happens to be 415 yards long. That means that whole, it's like one continuous piece of yarn that's 415 yards long, or 380 meters. The pattern also may tell you that's how many yards or meters you need. So the pattern might tell you how many ounces. It might tell you how many yards. It might tell you both. It might tell you how many grams. It might tell you how many meters. It might tell you both. It just depends on the person who's created the pattern. The fiber content is on here. This one happens to be 90% acrylic and 10% alpaca wool. So this one has a little bit of a blend. The acrylics are the ones that are usually the least expensive, and the more fibers, the fibers can be, I've paid as much as $22 for a skein of yarn, and I've paid as little as $2 for a skein of yarn. So the prices vary, and it's often varied based on how much is in there, the length. It's also varied based on the content, and the fancier the content, the more you're going to pay. To get started, I just go with the basic acrylic with this number 4 on it if you're just learning. Okay, then down here it tells us how to launder it, and it gives us this little code or key over here, and it tells you over here what that means. So in this case, what it's telling us is it's telling us that our water temperature should be cool. So when we wash this, it should be cool. It gives us this little fancy, looks like a tent to me. What it's telling us is don't bleach it because it's going to wreck it. This one is telling us, this square with the little minus sign in it is telling us to dry this piece flat. So if you make a sweater out of it and you wash it in cool water in your washing machine on the gentle cycle, you might want to, I lay it out flat on my bed, but you can get a drying rack. What you don't want to do is hang it dry because it'll stretch. That's what it, when it says dry flat, that's what it's telling you. And then it's telling you this little symbol right here means don't iron it. Don't iron it because that will actually, in this case, what it would do is melt the yarn. And then finally, it's going to tell you the gauge. And this is, I don't know if you can see this, but there's 2 knitting needles here. That's going to tell you the knitting gauge. And there's a crochet hook here, and that's going to tell you the crochet gauge. Now I'm going to go a screen ahead and show you a close-up of what, this is a different skein, but I want to show you a close-up of this section. So what they are telling you is that if you swatch this with a crochet hook size J, so you've got your number 4 weight, if you use a crochet hook J or a 10 or a 6 millimeter hook, and you use 12 single crochets wide and do 15 rows, when you get done, it should be 4 inches by 4 inches wide. Almost all swatching is done in 4 by 4 inches. I don't know why that's common, but that's what it's telling you. Using a J hook, if you have 12 single crochets wide and 15 rows high, it should turn out 4 by 4. Now in a blanket, probably doesn't matter so much, but if you're making clothing, this is really important to swatch ahead of time. And what it's telling you is make a sample, crochet it using a J hook, 12 stitches wide, 15 rows high, and check to see that it turns out 4 by 4. Now, what I know about myself is that I crochet loose compared to compared to average. And so if I want I did a whole American Girl outfit for my granddaughter. I used the hook that was recommended. I didn't swatch ahead of time and the clothes fell off the doll. I was so disappointed to have put in all that work and have it turn out too big for the doll. What I've learned is I need to go down. I need to go down at least 1 hook size, if not 2. If you're a very tight crocheter, you may need to go up a hook. And that's why they tell you this swatching. If you take my introduction to knitting class, which is later this week, you'll hear this again, the same process and how to do it with a knitting needle. Yes, I see over here in the chat box that there's a question, will I be teaching how to read a pattern? Yes, that's going to be toward the end. Are there any quick questions at this point other than will we be reading the pattern? Are there any quick questions on this part? We need to be quick because we've got a lot to cover. Okay, the hook, the parts of the hook. And I want to show you.
Excuse me, Sarah.
What's that?
There was a question in the chat box that said, it's from Mia. She asked that, will you be teaching how to read a pattern?
Yes, at the end of the class, I'm going to be actually giving you a walkthrough of an example of how to read the pattern. And if you take my intermediate class, which is not yet scheduled, we'll be talking about reading the pattern in a lot more detail. Okay, so here are 3 hooks, different sizes, and I'm going to talk about this for a little bit. But I got this great big crochet hook, which I actually crocheted a project. I got a picture of at the end of the video. I'm going to use this because I think it's easier for you to see. This is the tip or the point, and you need this to be pointy so that it can go through the stitches. That's what that point is for. The throat is this part right here, or this part right here. This is the throat. There's the shaft, which is this part of the hook. It's this one, it's tapered right here. And there's this round part right here. That's kind of like the working area of the hook. Then you've got your grip. Now you'll notice on this great big one, there is no grip, but on this one, there is. And the grip is like a flat spot where it's where you put your fingers. And that grip really helps you hold it correctly when you're crocheting. So if you can get a crochet hook with a grip on it, do so. This is not convenient for learning, but it is convenient for demonstration. And then there's the handle part of it, which is the part that rests in your hand when you're crocheting. The other thing that I like people to know is there's two kinds of hooks, the inline hook and the tapered hook. I definitely prefer this tapered hook. And what it's really talking about is the shape of the throat. I don't know if you can see that, but this is the part that catches the yarn. And I find in the incline, it's flatter. It's like they've taken the hook and they've squished it. And I find it harder to grab the throat with the incline style. And I've pretty much thrown away every hook that I've ever gotten that has that incline because I can't crochet as fast with it. So those are the parts of the hook. You're going to need to know that as we get going here. Today's supplies, if you want to crochet while we're talking, use your medium weight yarn. We're going to be using an eye for this project, and you're going to need a pair of scissors. But remember, if you miss this, you can get it in a recording. Today's pattern, and if you want to just jot a note down if you're a crocheter. And I'm going to send you this afterwards in the notes. But if you want to get started right now while we're talking, you already know how to crochet. We're going to chain 35. We're going to single crochet in the second chain from the hook, and in each chain across 34 stitches in each row. You're going to chain one and turn. This whole project is single crochet in every stitch, and you're going to repeat that until it's square, and you're going to end up with this very plain, very simple dishcloth. So I wanted you, if you wanted to have a completed project, be able to say, oh, I did something besides just learn how to do the stitches. So ask me at any point. I've got this in my head. It's chain 35, single crochet in the second chain from the hook, giving you 34 stitches in each row. You're going to chain one and turn at the end of every row, and you're going to repeat that very simple pattern until it's square. And if you want to know how it's square, when I was crocheting this, I didn't count my rows. What I did was I just pulled it corner to corner and made a triangle, and that's how I knew I was done. So I didn't do any counting of rows in this particular pattern. Okay. Here's where we get into some demonstration videos. And if you've never worked with a skein of yarn before, this is a handy skill to know. How do you get that yarn going so that you can crochet smoothly? This is how we find the center of our skein. So this is a skein of cotton crochet yarn or knitting yarn, different than an elongated skein. This one's more elongated. So for the dishcloth, by the way, I used cotton thread because I like it better for dishcloths. Acrylic doesn't make a very good dishcloth. So the dishcloth yarn is cotton, and I do prefer that. If you got acrylic, it's okay. It'll work just the same as long as it's a size 4. It's a little more squat, but they work pretty much the same way. Think of this as one really long piece of thread that's wound around. So there's the outside end, and there's the inside end. The outside end is not a good one to pull from because there's no smooth way to unravel it without rolling the skein all around. So my favorite way is what I'm going to show you right here, and that's that you kind of poke into the center. You keep poking until you get as close to the center of the skein as you possibly can. And then I take my finger and my thumb and I reach inside there and I pull out with my finger and thumb a piece of yarn, and I can see now that I've gotten down to the single pull. And so I look, and lo and behold, there's my thread end. And so this is where I want to pull from. Once I use up this little extra that I pulled out, it will pull freely from the skein without the skein ever moving. And you can use almost your entire skein without ever getting a knot and without the skein ever rolling. So that's the beauty of pulling from the center. This is Okay, now if you've never made a slip knot before, slip knot is an important first stitch. You can just make a little loose tied knot, but it's not very forgiving. Slip knot is the basic start for both knitting and crocheting. So here's the slip knot video. I am monitoring the chat. So if you want to ask me a question while this is me, I recorded these, so this is me teaching it, but I can easily monitor the chat. So if you want to ask me a question, I can answer that while we're watching these. So this is going to demonstrate making a slip knot. Here's the end of your yarn right here, and at the tail, wherever your tail is. And I go, oh, I don't know, three inches up or so, pick it up and just curl it around so that it makes a loop. So that this tail is crossing the part that's coming out of the skein itself. And then you just take this tail, poke it up underneath, and grab it. And then holding on to both the tail and the part coming out of the skein with your right hand and the loop with your left, you're gonna tighten that down to make your slip knot. And then you can adjust it by pulling on the thread, or yarn. And when you do that, then that makes your beginning stitch so that you can begin your first, for example, your first crochet stitch or your first knitting stitch. But the slip knot is important because it's exactly the right size because of the way you can tighten it, and it also can be pulled right out like magic. Thanks. Okay, next is holding the hook. So let's just talk about the crochet hook itself for just one minute. I'm gonna actually move this head to 30 seconds because there's two kinds of common holds for a crochet hook. One, which is my favorite, is what they call the pencil grip. And basically I'm holding this crochet hook in my hand like a pencil with my thumb and my pointer finger on the grip. So I'm holding it like this. The second way to hold it is what they call the knife hold. Not my favorite, but Vanna White loves it. And it looks like this, where you're holding it. It's still between your thumb and your pointer finger, but you're holding it in this position. Let me show you it from this angle. And those are the two most popular holds. All right, so now we've done the slip knot. We know how to hold the hook. Now we're going to talk about holding the yarn itself. And this is tricky. This is the tricky part to me of learning how to crochet. So to hold the yarn and the hook together, you have your slip knot already made, and then you've got your hook. Pick up your hook and put it through your slip knot. Tighten your slip knot down, but not too tight. You want to be able to make sure your hook can come through it. So you want to tight, but not too tight. Then you wrap your yarn around your first finger. This is the way I hold it. There's lots of ways to hold your yarn. This is my preferred way. And then you grab a hold of the knot with your middle finger and your thumb. So right there. And then I like to use that pencil grip. And so I have wrapped my bottom two fingers around the working yarn that leads to the skein. So the total hold is wrap around your finger, first finger, hold the knot with your middle finger and your thumb, and you hold your working yarn with your ring finger and your little finger. Are there any questions right now on the hold? You can unmute yourself if you have a question on this. I will tell you that some people wrap around multiple fingers. I've seen a wrap where they go around the pointer finger and around a the pinky finger. The more you wrap it, the tighter the yarn comes through, and the tighter your stitches will be. So people that tend to crochet a tighter weave, wrap around more fingers. It's probably one of the reasons that I have to go down hook sizes is because I only wrap around one finger. So this is the position for holding the yarn. And to make the first chain, we're going to have the throat of the hook right here facing us. And we're going to go from the front to the back and from underneath to up above and turn the hook right here using the grip as a guide so that the throat is now facing down. We grab the yarn and bring it through the loop on the hook, and that is our first chain. All right, are you getting it? So to hold the, okay, if you're, give me some feedback over in the chat box. I'm curious to know if you're able to pick it up from the video. This is very, very intriguing to me. So now we're going to actually do the chain stitch itself. So we've done our first chain. Now we're going to do a bunch of chains, 12, I think, actually. So the chain stitch is the basic foundation for most crochet projects. It's your base row beginning mechanism. So in this, starting right here, I've already done my slipknot. I put my crochet hook through it. I've got my yarn held in its proper manner. And to make that first chain with the throat of the hook facing me, I go in front of the yarn, under it, go up on top of it, and then turn my throat so that it's pointed down toward the ground, grabbing the yarn and pulling it through. Now you can see as I pull it through that I'm also tugging slightly down to make room for the point of the throat to go through that stitch. And that is what that first stitch looks like. Now, if in today's lesson, we're going to be making a washcloth, and so we're going to do 33 or so of these. So I'll double check that. 35 in a minute. 33. So it would look like this. I have 1. Now there's 2. There's 3. And then it starts to feel kind of awkward or loosey-goosey. And so I just simply move my thumb and my middle finger up, back right under the needle. And I usually do 2 to 3 chains before I adjust my fingers again and move up. There's 3 more. Here's 3 more. And that's how you make the chain. Okay, I want to show you how to count those. So there's 2 ways you can track your stitches. You can keep track as you go along. I do it sometimes with tally marks. You can get a stitch counter, or you can, do a bunch. Like in an Afghan, you might do 150 chains to start an Afghan, and I'll get lost in it. Invariably, I'll get interrupted, and so I want to know how to count it in case I lose track of my count as I'm going along. Now we want to see how many chains we've actually made. And so we want to know how to identify the individual chains. I like to think of it when I look at it this way, kind of in a vertical way. I like to think of these as V's. So here's the left part of the V and the right part of the V. That's 1 chain stitch. So this is the initial chain that was on the hook when I started. That was the slip knot. That's the first chain. So it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let me tug this up straight a little bit. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Now what we don't count is the loop that's on its hook. So then we have to remember that we're counting the ones that are complete. Sorry about that. Oop. Let me go back here. I tried to type in the chat box and it didn't like me doing that. now we want to see how many chain here. This would be the top loop. This would be the bottom loop. And if we turn it over, we can see we can tell the front from the back easily because the back has the bump. And there's actually a way you can use these bumps when you start your second row, but we'll save that for our advanced class. Right now, when we get ready to start our single crochet row, we're going to use that top of the chain. Okay, so I see a question. The videos are great. Will we receive them with the recording when we request it? I honestly don't know the answer to that. Joe, do you happen to know the answer to that question?
Yes, absolutely. I'll answer that in the chat. Although we are going to send the recording after this, you'd be the we have to send an email to help@getsetup.io to getting the recording of this class.
Okay, so to get the recording, it's help@getsetup.io, and you're going to put that in the chat.
Yeah, I'm going to put that in the chat in the end of the session, in the end of the class.
Okay. All right. So we've made our chain stitch, which is, by the way, in a pattern abbreviated CH. It's also often called the foundation stitch. And that is most generally the way crochet projects are started. There is another way when you do a granny square. We're not going to talk about that today, but this is generally that foundation row is generally how projects are started. And now we're going to move into the single crochet. If you happen to be joining us from the UK, obviously they use metrics, but the other thing is some of their abbreviations are different. So my understanding is the single crochet that I'm going to teach today, if you're in the UK, it's called double crochet. And so understanding that there's a difference between the UK and the United States in how we name our stitches is an important thing to note. So I'm teaching the US version of the single crochet stitch. We're going to begin our single crochet row at this point. And so I've got 12 chains made on my sample, and I've got my working loop on my hook. And I'm going to begin my first stitch in the second chain from the hook. Now, most often, your pattern is going to tell you where to start. Rule of thumb for just a basic single crochet pattern would be to start in the second chain from the hook. We don't start in the first one because you can see that our yarn goes through that first one, and we would actually undo what we've already done if we went in that first one, which is why we go in the second one. I just interrupt for a second and remind you that if you're crocheting the dishcloth, you've chained 35 stitches. You're going to start in that second chain from the hook, just like I am demonstrating here, and you're going to end up with 34 single crochets in each row from now on. So I'll tighten this back down, tighten my loop back down, and I wind my thread exactly the same. Turn my chain, so now instead of going down or working over from the right, now it's horizontal, and I'm going to use my hook, and I'm going to say, ooh, I don't want to go in that first chain stitch, I want to go in the second. And so to get my fingers out of the way, I'm actually going to use the knife hold for a minute because I think you can see it better in the knife hold. I'm going to take the tip of the crochet hook, I'm going to go through the top loop of the chain. I'm going to go right through there with my tip, and that's why you need that tip, is for that poking. I'm going to go from underneath. I'm going to, with the throat pointed toward me, I'm going to grab the thread and turn it as I come back through, and I'm going to pull it up straight, putting 2 loops on my hook. So once I've got the 2 loops, I'm going to move my needle back, hook back to the throat facing me, and go under the thread, turning the hook to that down position and pulling the loop through both loops here, and that completes my first single crochet stitch. To do the second one, I go in the loop right next door. So you go down through the top, right in that center part under the top loop, through, grab the thread, turning the needle, pull it back through, putting 2 loops on the hook. And it's always good to try to kind of have those in equal tension between those 2 loops. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to grab my thread from underneath, turn, and pull through both. There's my second one. Move my fingers over. I'm going to put my pointer up my tip of my hook through under that top loop through the center of the chain stitch. I'm going to grab the thread, pull it back through, and now I've got the 2 loops on my hook. I'm going to wrap and pull through 2. So down through, grab it, up, 2 on the hook, wrap and pull through, grab it, 2 on the hook, wrap it and pull. I'm going to switch to my pencil position so that you can see how I hold it in the pencil position. So I've got my... I'm going to interrupt here again too. Notice what I'm doing with my right hand and my middle finger and my ring finger. I can now, in this position, I can now hold my work with these 2 fingers, which is one of the reasons I think I prefer the pencil hold a little bit over the knife hold. Because these fingers I start using these fingers a lot. And you also notice that my pointer finger on my left hand is really just a holder. It's just holding the yarn. My working fingers are my middle finger and my thumb. My working loop, I go through the center of the stitch, wrap and pull, putting 2 loops on the hook, wrap and pull through 2. Through, pull, wrap, pull, through, pull, wrap, pull, through, pull, wrap, pull, through, pull, pull, through, pull, wrap, pull. And I've completed my first row of single crochet stitches. So remember, in this, I'm just demonstrating a swatch. If you're doing the dishcloth, you've chained 35 and you're going to do 34 single crochets, where I just did the 12. I did the swatch for the video so that I could, more easily demonstrate it for you. All right, so now we've gotten to the end of our first row. What do? In this case, we're gonna, if we were doing something that was a shirt, for example, or a tube of some sort, we might crochet in the round. But for this project, the dishcloth, we're actually going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, which creates a 2-sided, there's not a right side and a wrong side when you're going back and forth oftentimes. Well, back and forth with a single crochet stitch is what I should say. So now how do we turn it to go back? Okay, let's look at counting and turning. So this is my first row of single crochet, and there's 2 ways to count it, whichever one is easier. I'm gonna put a little bit of shadow on here so you can see it a little bit better. There's 2 ways you could count it. I don't know if you can tell, but right here there's a V. So there's a V here, 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 etc. And if I counted those, I'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Remember we had 12 chains, but we skipped 1. So that's why we have 11. There's another way to count it. And this one, it might be just a little bit cleaner when you first, especially when you first get started. And that's to look at the top, which really looks identical to your chain foundation stitches. See the V's right there? So you can count it the same way. Starting here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So there's 11 when we count it here. There's 11 when we count it here. Now, to turn and go back the other direction, I'll put my working hands back together. Same hold as before. I'm going to use that pencil hold on the needle, and I'm going to chain 1 before I turn. So I'm going to chain 1. That's rule of thumb with single crochet. So I grab, wrap, and pull through 1, and then I simply take my work and turn it back in the opposite direction. So where we tend to read right to left, we crochet left to right. And so now I'm at the left hand end of the row. And where I'm going to put the needle is, I'm going to use that tip again, the tip of the hook, tip of the needle, and I'm going to put it right here. Now, if you're wondering where that is, if you look at the top, what I've done is I've put it directly under the V-stitch with nothing else in the way. And that's where I'm putting the hook. So once I get it through there, I wrap and pull, putting 2 back up onto the hook again, and then I wrap and pull through 2. So let me show you again. So I go in from the front right here, which is under the V-stitch, right there. Wrap and pull, 2 on my needle, wrap and pull. So through, wrap and pull, wrap and pull through 2. Through, wrap and pull through 2. Through, wrap and pull through 2. And I'll do that for all of the stitches across this row. You would be doing 34 if you were doing a dishcloth. Coming to the end here pretty quick. This is a little bit tricky because if you're not careful with your count, you can end up actually making your work get wider and wider and wider. So in this case, I never want to, in this pattern where I'm trying to make a square or a rectangle, I don't ever want to do more than 11 stitches. So this is where I'm going to double check. So I'm at the end of my second row and I want to count. Do I still have 11 stitches? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. If I had 9, that means I probably messed something up back here. If I have 11, it means I've probably put an extra one in here. But keeping track of that count is very important. Okay, let's look at count. Okay, this is a relatively quick video on how to count your rows. Okay, we're going to count our rows and tie them off at this point and tie off our work to end it. I have made 10 rows and I'm done. I could use this piece that's 11 stitches wide and 10 rows long. I can use this as a face pad in my shower if I wanted to keep this. But let's count the rows. So we had our foundation chain row that's down here at the bottom, and you can see it if you flip it up a little bit there. But we're not going to count the foundation row. That's just the foundation. Think of it as ground 0. But to count, we've got a row here that ends, I don't know, it has this little bump on the top. That's the first row. Here's the second row, which has more of a V-stitch look with these 2 lines in between it. So we've got the bump row and the line row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 rows. The other thing that is, you can see it better, I think, from a little bit away, and maybe you can see it even better in your own work, but it's almost easier to count double rows because the line between 2 rows seems to be a little bit more obvious to me. There seems to be a little deeper ridge in between every other row. So this would be the end of the first 2 rows. So this would be 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So there's a couple ways that you can count those rows. An advanced course might show us how to keep from getting these bumpy ridges. But we're not going to do that. We're not going to worry about that in our beginnings. So, and then how do you end it? Well, we've got this loop on the hook. And if we take it out, we're going to have a problem here. So what we want to do is we want to cut it just an inch or two long. If you use a long tail, you can use a yarn needle to weave your yarn back through. If you use a shorter one, you have to kind of bound to using your crochet hook, but you know, up of a couple inches at least. And then you just take that cut tail, you put it up through here, and you just tighten that down. And to me, that has always been secure enough. Really tighten that. And then the next thing we're going to do is weave in our ends, and that will be in the next video. When you get done with your work, you need to weave your ends in. And you need to do that to keep it from unraveling. If I were to cut this off right here and make it nice and neat, this yarn would actually pull out through that loop and my work would unravel. So to weave it in, there's two ways that you can do it. One is with a crochet hook and one is with a yarn needle, which looks like a sewing needle with an eye in it. That's a little bit bigger, but basically what you do, and there's no particular rhyme or reason to this, you're just catching that thread and pulling it through the stitches and winding it through. I tend to go down here and try to go through the back of my work, the back side of my piece, whatever the back side is, and just pull that. I'm truly doing this randomly. So if you're trying to say, well, which stitches is she going through? It's random every single time I do it randomly. Pull that through, and I do that until I've gone through at least 5 stitches and kind of hidden that yarn inside so you can't see it. And you can do it 1 stitch at a time. As you get, used to it, you could probably go through more than 1 stitch at a time. Let's see if I can just show you what I mean. You can pick up, like I could go through this, and I could go through this, and I could go through this all at once and hide my thread under 3 stitches by pulling that through all 3 stitches at one time, which can be good. Sometimes it can actually take more time than the other. So then once you pull it through, once you get it through enough stitches, I always stretch it a little bit and make sure that it's, gut's not gonna pull loose. And then I just cut it off right next to the work. All right, so I'm gonna we're getting near the end and I wanna leave some time for questions, but this would be, this video just shows you that you just rip back by pulling back on this working thread, using this working thread, you just pull it out back and then stick your needle back through the loop. Ripping a mistake is real easy in crochet, not so easy in knitting. So that's what that one is. This is a technique I found online that I wanted to share. We're not going to be able to have time for this either. You can just knot your threads together if you're joining a new skein and work those threads in, those end threads in, just the way you do when you tie off your work. All right, so let's recap a single crochet. A single crochet, you insert the hook front to back where the stitch is going to go, you yarn over, you pull up the loop, creating 2 loops on the hook, yarn over and pull the working yarn through both loops on the hook. Here's examples of abbreviations you would see in a pattern. So the chain or the foundation stitch is abbreviated CH. Sometimes you'll see CHS, but most frequently it's just CH. Single SC is the abbreviation for single crochet. In the intermediate class, we would be covering the half double crochet, the double crochet, and the treble crochet, which are variations of the single crochet. So if you know how to single crochet, you're going to be able to do the half double crochet, the double crochet, and the treble crochet with just a little tiny bit more instruction. MC is the abbreviation that you might see for main color, and CC is the abbreviation that you might see for a contrasting color. So in this case, my main color was white, but if I wanted to, I could put a simple single crochet stitch all the way around the edge in a contrasting color, which would make it a little bit more interesting. Here's an example of a row 2 of a single crochet pattern dishcloth. This was a dishcloth where you single crocheted, chained 1, single crochet, chain 1, which left a little tiny bit of a hole or a gap in there. It just makes a little lacier look. This is how you would read this. You would chain 1 at the end of row 1. You would chain 1, which is your turning chain. You would turn your work, so you're going back toward the left, and you would single crochet in the first single crochet stitch from row 1. So you're seeing this is why it's confusing. You're seeing the row, this is from an actual pattern. You're seeing single crochet and single crochet, and it can look confusing. So think of this as a verb. You're going to single crochet in the first in the first noun, the single crochet identified stitch from the row before. So you're going to single crochet into the first single crochet stitch from the row before. And then in this case, notice the bracket. You're going to chain 1, skip the next single crochet stitch. That's what that's telling you. Chain 1, skip, and skip sometimes is abbreviated SK. Skip the next single crochet in the next single crochet stitch. And then everything that's in the brackets, you're going to do 16 times. Now, if you have an interest in learning more detailed how to read a pattern, I would love that feedback. I could create a class that's just about reading a pattern and do various examples of that if that's a need that's out there. So if you'd like more on this, I'd love that feedback either in the chat box or in the feedback email afterwards. I see a question, will you be teaching a class how to make a hat on a loom? I could. I've done loom knitting. I actually think of that as more knitting than I do crocheting. I don't know, I might be wrong on that, but I could. And so if that's an interest, please put that in your ideas and make sure that we get that at help@getsetup.io. Here's some examples of some things that I've crocheted. This is my favorite baby blanket pattern. I've made this for every one of my grandchildren in various different colors. This is I had this great idea that I could make an Afghan for my bed. This is a queen size Afghan, and it was modeled after a quilting pattern. I think it was called the Prairie Star. These are individual diamonds that I then crocheted together into this pattern to make this. This is the rug that I made using, this is strips of fabric, believe it or not, cotton fabric, and that's what I used this crochet hook for. We were in a 100-year-old house doing some remodeling, and the floor obviously needed some remodeling, but I didn't want to spend money on a rug at that point. So I just made this out of fabric, scrap fabric that I had, and it served us well for a few years while we were waiting to refinish that room. Oops. This is a hexagon pattern. This might be called a hexagon granny square. You've probably seen the word granny square that my daughter requested. This is a crochet blanket using the Tunisian style, which uses a hook which looks like a combination of a knitting needle and a crochet hook. I'm not as skilled at this, but I did enjoy it. It makes it much thicker. This I didn't love this for how because it was very thick and almost stiff. But that's a style. I wanted you to know that you can do lots of things with crocheting. So in this case, I sewed these American Girl doll outfits for my granddaughter, and I crocheted these little necklaces using some different crochet stitches for that. This is, I do these all the time. Somebody gave me this as a gift when I had one of my children, and I do this all the time. Now this is my grandson, Makai, when he was just a few days old. This is a flannel blanket, 2 layers thick. I sewed it together, and then I crocheted this edge on it. And I used the cotton crochet thread and the little tiny needle to do that. It makes a fabulous baby gift. Everybody I give it to loves it. My daughter-in-law wanted one her size. She wanted an adult size one. She loves elephants. And I found an online pattern on YouTube on how to crochet an elephant edge. Can you see there's the trunk and there's the ear and there's the face and there's the body, but it was in Spanish. And so I got my friend who's bilingual to interpret it for me, and I was able to crochet an elephant edge on her blanket. This is for my granddaughter that is due in June. They're doing a Star Wars theme. Found some nursery fabric flannel, and I crocheted that edge on that. And so those are some examples. You can find all kinds of resources online. So just put in free beginner crochet patterns, and you're going to get probably more things than you can possibly do. Once you get yourself established, I would recommend you do that. Tips and tricks: keep your stitches just right. Practice makes perfect. Try different hooks, different yarns. Gauge matters. Keep track of your stitch and row count. Don't be afraid to rip it. Be a frog, and give yourself some grace while you're learning. These titles are actually, I reversed this. These are my next classes: Learn to Knit, the 10-minute table runner, paper flowers. And then here's some other related classes that you might be interested in taking. You can share your experiences with Liz at getsetup.io. Yes, I could do a class on the rug. I could do a class on making the necklaces. I would be happy to do one on reading patterns. What else here? We'd love to have you invite a friend. Now remember, you're going to get some feedback at me, and I'll put some. You're going to get an email from Get Set Up, and I'll put my resources in there for you. Are there any last questions? I know I've run over already by 1 minute, but are there? And I'll stay on. Go ahead. If you have to leave, if you got another class to go to, please feel free to go. But I'll stay on for just a couple minutes and answer any questions that people might have. Thank you. You've been a wonderful group. I have so enjoyed doing this. I'm learning a lot. As I teach these classes. Any questions?
Sarah, this is Leona. I'm sorry, I didn't get to the class till late, and I only got like the last 10 minutes, and I'm sorry I missed it because I really did want to see it. So I can request the copy of this?
Yes, and I'm also teaching the exact same class next week.
I'm sorry, what kind of class?
I'm also teaching this exact same class.
Oh, okay. Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Request a recording by, you just say, I want Sarah's Learn to Crochet class, and you do that by emailing help@getsetup.io.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Other questions, comments, feedback?
So after you do your row and you turn it over, you say to chain one to start the next row?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. That gets you up to the right height. If you don't do that, then your piece would become smashed on the edges.
Oh, okay.
That's why you do that stitch.
Oh, thank you. Okay,
Yeah,
that's better.
That's a great question.
Will you be doing another one this week? Like for the next, like part 2 or something? Would it be this week?
Not on the crocheting. We're waiting to see. What Get Set Up will do is they'll see what the interest is. So make sure you say in your feedback that you are interested in an intermediate or an advanced class or a pattern reading class, so that Get Set Up knows that there's an interest, and then they'll tell me to go ahead and develop it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? All right, well, it's been wonderful to be with you today. Have a great day. I hope you can get out and get some sunshine. Take care now.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.